Hi, welcome to OPSRACE training program. So we are discussing about validation of the API and documentation. So if we look at here, so I have updated the documentation. This is the Swagger UI that is provided by Swagger. So we can see here, you can add a lot more description. So here I have just added the title, description, the contact detail, the license version, and you can list down all of your servers. So pre-prod server. So usually you deploy your documentation on one specific server, and that server then you can be utilized to make queries directly to different APIs. So you can list all of your pre-prod server like dev, staging, QA, or pre-prod, or anything that you want to test as before the production environment. And it also allow you to authorize, because some of your API would be secure, so you can use the authorization option. You can provide here your bearer token. Swagger also provide you a mechanism to acquire that token as well, and then pre-populate that in whatever secure request you can send. Here this documentation is so enriched, it is telling you like this is the secure endpoint, whereas the rest of them can be accessed publicly. It could be true or not, because it again depend on the implementation, but here it says this endpoint is secure, so you must pass the authorization token. Obviously this API may not, this documentation part may not verify this thing, but this is a mandatory thing. Okay, next important thing is we can see here all our previous API which does not make sense, we have deprecated them. So Java is a mechanism where you just set the annotation as deprecated. These API would be shown as grayed out, and you can still use them, but it's telling us like these APIs are deprecated and may be replaced in the future. So we have already created our this magical patch method which handles all the situations, so we don't need these individual function. So if I walk you through the code here, we can see here I have deprecated these endpoint, and hence you can see here. So again, this is enrichment. This is the documentation of the Swagger, how it shows things. Another important thing is Swagger automatically reads your code specifically for the Java Spring Boot application. It try to find out all the controllers. Controllers are the classes which specify these URLs, the endpoint for the interaction. So it automatically reads them, it automatically add them. Here we can see we have a health controller where we have two endpoints, one is front slash, another is health. So we can hide this from the documentation as well, from the Swagger. Just API ignore, we can use the annotation. So it automatically creates everything. And if we look at it, it will find out like what is the mandatory field. It can find out that as well. If there is any documentation, if something we have specified in the documentation, it will show this here as well. So here in the code I have mentioned like for the get mapping find by car, we can see here I have added the parameter description, ID of the car, which is not null, positive integer, and this is again Spring Boot syntax. Similar is shown here. We can see here it is giving us the description. It's telling us that it's a mandatory field, and if we want to ignore, we have to mention that. Some of the documentation you can modify, some of the documentation it can build on its own. It says that we will be returning 200 OK response, and this would be the type. So this is the type. It has parsed from this return type car. So car is an object with ID, registration number, and everything. So that's why it has picked everything from there, and hence we can see here that the car object is shown because it's expecting on, in the case of 200, it will return us this object. Okay, and we can look at another API where there is simple API. There is no description because we haven't mentioned in the documentation. It is very obvious that car ID is a positive integer, and it should be like this. Okay, let's look at here on the post API. We can see it is telling us like it's a create car. So I have added this in the documentation using Swagger annotation, so that's why it's telling me this. It is also telling me the description. Okay, and we can see here this is the body it wants as an input, and it will return us 200 when car is created. So this is also again a custom message. We can specify here 400 bad requests. So if something is bad, it will return 400 with whatever the code is and the message. If car is not found, so it will return 404 with whatever the code is and the message. So this is basically the HTTP status code: 200, 400, 404, and 5xx. These are the HTTP status code which are designed to tell you something very high. We discussed 200 success, 400 error due to the user input, 500 error due to server configuration or server code or something like that. So I have added this in the documentation. Now this API is complete in terms of documentation. It will tell you like what is required, what is mandatory, what it will return, and the sample, something like that. So yeah, that's how the API should be enriched, API should behave. Okay, let's go through some code. I just want to show you. So this was our controller. I have moved all the functionality, so the controller should only specify the endpoints. It should not include any logic, anything. It should take everything to the service layer, which is the business layer. So we have introduced our service, car service here. It will be performing everything. So if we want to call the list API, it will just forward this request to the service, and the service will then return it. If we want to find something by ID, so here I'm taking the ID as a string, because if you don't pass a proper string, this will break here. Spring Boot won't let you get in. It will throw its own custom error. So in order to handle that situation, I'm taking input as a string, and once I receive the string, I validate, I try to convert this string into a number. If this is a valid number, it will be converted. Otherwise, it will throw an exception that the required number format was not passed, and hence that's the problem. So this is my way of doing things. There are a lot of other ways as well, a better way as well, where you can manage these validation as well as throw custom error. So I have done this just to throw a custom error. I can show you here. It says a null value passed. If null is passed, it says that ID is not a valid positive integer. So I know that all of my IDs are long value. So if I am validating, I am trying to convert it to long value. So it must be a valid positive integer value, because we see that there is a number format exception which is captured here, and then we have thrown our own custom exception so that we can use that. Okay. Then it forward the request to the service, and service then find the car and return the result. Similarly, for the creation, updation, and partial update, as well as our delete. So in case of delete, we are returning the Boolean response, if it is successful or not, whatever the message is there. So in that case, we can see in the documentation here as well. If we look at delete, it says that it will return us this message where it is success, true or false, and the message, whatever that message is. Message is generally the resource is deleted or the car is deleted. Okay. And if we look at the service here, let's go to the service. So before we talk about service, I want to show you, like, I have implemented an interface. This interface is basically adding all the documentation part of the Swagger. So if I have to specify the function name, the possible responses, I have to define the mapping, etc., so that our controller is like a simple class. It behaves like a very, very simple class, whereas this interface contains all the documentation part, everything, all the rules and regulation. This is also helpful when you provide the client this interface, car API, especially in the Java. They can make all the API call without writing the exact HTTP transfer protocol or writing anything which is communication through this. Okay, so they will just the client will just use this and inject as a dependency injection. The container will provide the implementation. So feign client, or there are other techniques where the client does not have to implement all the code. They can just use this interface to create the proxy class. So it contains documentation as well as mapping, everything here, so that our controller look very simple, clean, and nice. You can even move these as well to your API interface, so that it's a very simple class. So if we talk about the service, we have again an interface which provide all the function that will run, and there is then implementation class where it is a specific class. Again, we are using here hash map to keep all the cars. So this is our local in-memory database where we are putting all the cars. We just try to find things here. If there is a key, if it is not found, it throws the exception. Here we can see we have rewritten or refactored our create method. This is simple validate car. So the method is simpler. We understand that it is performing some sort of validation, then we increment the ID, and then we just save it. So it's a simple, straight, clean method, whereas we can jump into validate car. So this is in the car validator, where we have used validate string, and whenever we pass this thing, we have also specified a specific code. So if the registration number is missing, throw this error. If make is missing, so all these numbers, previously we were using these magic numbers, now I have moved all of them to a central place where this can be shared with other team members. It could be published as well. So if some required field is missing, so it's a generic error. So if required string is if required field is missing, it could be anything, so it will be 9001. If required string is missing, again this is a sub level of the required field, but again it's a generic for all the string, for all the integer, for all the IDs. And here we are using very specific based on our situation. So I want to throw 9005. If my registration number is missing, you can use missing required field as well, but again it depends. So all the magic numbers are included here. And this is then published. This is used. Generally we create a repository for this, and in that repository we submit this interface or class, depends on your implementation technique, and then everybody use that constant dependency in their project so that it remain common, because there could be multiple microservices for that. Okay, so yeah, this is simple refactoring. We refactored a lot of things. So validate string is also moved to its own validation util, where we are using overloaded function. So if you want to validate string, just pass the value. If the value has a problem, it will throw a generic error. If you want to specify a specific code, so we have another implementation of it where you can specify the code and then a very generic method. And if you want to pass everything, like you want to have a custom message, custom code, so you can use this. So this is a validation class. Again, this is empty is from value util, so it basically check the value, it check the conversion, etc. thing. Validation and value util, the difference is it only check the status, and validation utils will always throw exception if something is missing, if something is a problem. So you would expect, you would have in your mind, like whenever I call the validation thing, it will throw an exception. So as discussed before, we want to return as soon as there is an error. We don't want to process further if even a single required field is missing. And that's how we protect our server from processing a request for performing something which will never end in a success. So why would we process that? If one field is missing, we just throw the exception and get out of this code or this flow. I hope things are much more clearer. You can even write better code than this. If you have anything in your mind, please comment below. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.